Welcome to Therapy Crime Scenes. My name is John Cordray, and I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I have over a decade of experience working with complex mental health cases. And I talk about true crime through the lens of mental health. Today, I want to take you into a case that's gripped the public attention, and many people have called this person the worst mom ever. And you'll find out why in this case. As a therapist, I'm trained to look beyond the surface and identify the behavior, the causes, and the motives of why people behave the way they do. This is the Casey Anthony case, and we're going to talk about the mental health indicators, my speculation of her mental health diagnosis, but it's not meant to sensationalize her or her actions. I want to be very clear here. This is a case of observing her behavior, not providing a mental health diagnosis for Casey Anthony. My goal is to unpack the mental health indicators, consider possible motives, and reflect on what this case teaches us about human behavior under extreme stress. So let's begin with this case. For those of you who may need a refresher, in 2008, Kaylee Anthony, a 2-year-old girl from Orlando, Florida, disappeared. Her mother, Casey Anthony, was just 22 years old at the time. She became the focus of intense scrutiny. For 31 days, Casey Anthony did not report her daughter missing, despite Kaylee's grandmother alerting the authorities after growing suspicious. During this time, Casey was seen socializing, partying, and even getting a tattoo that read Bella Vita, Italian for beautiful life. Kaylee's remains were later found in a wooded area near the Anthony home, and Casey was charged with first-degree murder among other counts. In 2011, after a highly politicized trial, Casey was acquitted of murder but convicted of lying to law enforcement. The verdict shocked many, as public sentiment largely viewed Casey as responsible for her daughter's death, whether through negligence or intent. As a therapist, when I approach a case like this, I started looking at the behavior, because behavior is a window into the mind. Casey's actions during those 31 days are a critical starting point. She didn't report Kaylee missing, yet she engaged in what appeared to be a carefree, even celebratory activities. To the public, this seems very callous, almost incomprehensible for a mother whose child was missing. But let's pause and consider what this might indicate psychologically. One possibility is disassociation, a coping mechanism where someone disconnects from reality to avoid overwhelming stress. If Casey knew or suspected something terrible had happened to Kaylee, disassociation could explain her ability to act as if nothing was wrong. It's not uncommon for individuals under extreme stress to compartmentalize, pushing painful truths into a mental box that they refuse to open. This doesn't excuse her behavior, though, but it does help us understand it. Yet, under another lens to consider is personality structure. Without diagnosing, I can say that certain personality traits, such as those associated with narcissistic or histrionic tendencies, might manifest in behaviors like seeking attention, prioritizing self-image, or struggling with empathy under extreme stress. Casey's documented lies, her shifting narratives, like claiming a nanny kidnapped Kaylee, and her apparent focus on maintaining a certain lifestyle could align with traits that prioritize self-preservation over accountability. Again, I'm speculating here, but these patterns raise questions about how she processed responsibility and guilt, if she felt it at all. Let's talk about Casey Anthony's lies, because they're a cornerstone to this case. Casey told law enforcement and her family elaborate stories that Kaylee was with her nanny, that she was working at Universal Studios when she wasn't, and that she was investigating Kaylee's disappearance herself. All lies. As a therapist, I see lying not just as a deception, but as a psychological strategy. Pathological lying can stem from a need to control a narrative, avoid shame, or maintain a sense of power in a chaotic situation. For Casey, the lies might have been a way to delay the inevitable confrontation with reality, whether that reality was Kaylee's death, her own role in it, or the judgment of others. But the complexity of her stories also suggests a level of premeditation, which complicates this picture. Was she buying time, protecting someone else, or protecting herself from emotional collapse? Now, let's dive into possible motives, which is where speculation becomes both fascinating and frightening. The prosecution argued that Casey wanted freedom from the responsibilities of motherhood, pointing to her partying and the Bella Vita tattoo as evidence as a desire for the unencumbered life. From a psychological perspective, this theory invites us to consider Casey's developmental stage. At 22, she was a young adult still navigating identity and independence, but her brain was not fully developed. The human brain develops around the mid to late 20s. Casey's brain wasn't developed yet. If she felt trapped by parenthood or by living with her parents, by financial dependence, it's plausible that resentment or overwhelm could have built up over time. For some young parents, the pressure of caregiving without adequate support can lead to impulsive or reckless decisions. Could this have escalated to neglect or even harm? It's a possibility, though the evidence doesn't definitively prove intent. Another motive to consider is an accident gone wrong. The defense claimed that Kaylee drowned accidentally in the family pool, and Casey, in a panic, covered it up with her father's help. Psychologically, this aligns with a fear-driven response. If Casey felt she couldn't face the shame or consequences of the accident, especially if she was negligent, like leaving Kaylee unsupervised, her lies could have been an attempt to rewrite the story. Shame pushed people to extreme lengths to avoid exposure, especially in a family dynamic like Casey's, which appeared fraught with tension. Casey's mother was described as controlling, and her father was emotionally distant or volatile. If Casey grew up in a household where mistakes were met with harsh judgment, covering up an accident might have felt like the only option. Let's explore this family dynamic a little further because it's a critical piece of this puzzle. Families are systems, and dysfunction in one part ripples through the whole. Public records and trial testimony painted a picture of a household under strain. Casey and her mom clashed over parenting Kaylee, and Casey's financial dependence created a power imbalance. As a therapist, I'm curious about Casey's attachment style, how her early relationships with her parents shaped her ability to cope with stress. If she experienced inconsistent caregiving or high expectations, she might have developed an avoidant or disorganized attachment style, leading to difficulties regulating emotions or seeking help in a crisis. This could explain why she didn't reach out for help when Kaylee went missing, instead retreating into denial or deception. There's also a question of trauma. Some speculate Casey experienced trauma, whether from her family environment or other unreported events that shaped her behavior. Her defense team alluded to allegations of abuse by her father, though these were never substantiated. If true, unresolved trauma could contribute to disassociation, emotional numbness, or a skewed sense of reality. Even without specific abuse, though, growing up in a high-conflict home can wire someone to prioritize self-protection over honesty or vulnerability. This doesn't justify harming a child, but it does contextualize why someone might respond in tragedy in ways that seem irrational. Now let's shift to the mental health indicators in Casey Anthony's behavior during and after the trial. Her demeanor in court, often described as detached or overly composed, struck many as odd. But as a therapist, I know emotional presentation can be misleading. Some people, under scrutiny, mask their feelings to appear in control. Others may genuinely feel disconnected from the gravity of their situation. This could point to a flat affect, a symptom seen in conditions like depression or post-traumatic stress disorder, or it could reflect a calculated effort to avoid incriminating herself. Post-trial, Casey's relative silence, she's given few interviews and largely avoided the public eye, suggests either self-preservation or a lack of desire to engage with the narrative around her. This withdrawal could indicate fear, shame of judgment, or simply an intentional choice to move on. One of the most troubling aspects of this case is the public's reaction, which I think warrants psychological reflection as well. The media frenzy and public outrage labeled Casey America's most hated mom. As a therapist, I see this as a collective projection of our fears about motherhood and betrayal. We want to believe parents are inherently protective, so when someone like Casey defies that expectation, it shakes our sense of safety. This intense emotion directed towards Casey, while understandable given Kaylee's death, it also reflects our discomfort with ambiguity. We want clear villains, but human behavior is rarely that simple. Casey's acquittal frustrated people because it left questions unanswered, and our brains crave closure. So what are the possible motives behind Casey Anthony's actions? I've outlined a few already. A desire for freedom, a cover-up of an accident, or a response to overwhelming shame or fear. But there's another possibility that I haven't touched on yet, and that's a psychological break. If Casey was grappling with untreated mental health issues like depression, anxiety, or an undiagnosed personality disorder, the stress of Kaylee's death, accidental or otherwise, could have triggered a temporary disconnect from reality. Again, this is not an excuse, but it's a reminder that mental health struggles can distort decision-making in profound ways. Without a clinical evaluation, we can't know, but it's a hypothesis worth considering. So what does this case teach us? First, it underscores the importance of mental health support. If Casey was struggling with parenting, family conflict, or her own emotional regulation, early intervention might have changed the trajectory of this case. Second, it highlights the complexity of human behavior. We're quick to judge, but understanding requires us to grapple with uncomfortable nuances. Finally, it reminds us of the tragedy at the heart of this case. Kaylee, a little girl who deserves safety and love, was failed by the adults around her. That loss will stay with us. As I wrap up this case, I encourage you to approach cases like this with curiosity rather than certainty. As a therapist, I've learned that people are shaped by forces we can't always see. Trauma, family dynamics, unmet needs, etc. Casey Anthony's story is a puzzle with missing pieces, and while we may never know the full truth, exploring it through a psychological lens helps us better understand the human condition. Let's consider where Casey Anthony's case stands today and what Casey herself is doing now, nearly 17 years after Kaylee's tragic death. I'm struck by how this case continues to evolve, not just in legal or factional terms, but in its psychological ripple effects on Casey, her family, and the public. Recent developments offer new lenses through which to view the mental health indicators we've already explored, from disassociation and shame to the complexities of family dysfunction and societal judgment. Since her 2011 acquittal, Casey Anthony has largely remained out of the public eye, but in March 2025, she reemerged in a surprising way, joining TikTok to announce a new career as a legal advocate and researcher. In a video that had over 4 million views, she stated she's worked in the legal field since 2011, likely referring to her role as a legal assistant and accountant for her defense team's lead investigator. She also launched a Substack newsletter with subscriptions up to $250 a year to share her writings and to advocate for gender identity rights, women's rights, and notably herself and her late daughter, Kaylee. This move has sparked intense backlash, with social media posts and media outlets like Newsweek labeling her rebranding as tone deaf, comparing it to infamous figures attempting image rehabilitation. From a psychological perspective, this could be an attempt to reclaim her narrative, a common response in individuals facing chronic public vilification. Yet her reported social anxiety and limited social circles suggest this step might also be a stem from complex mix of defiance and desperation to redefine her identity. Casey's personal life remains solitary. She lives alone, she's estranged from her parents, with minimal contact with her mother and brother. In 2024, Casey's parents participated in an A&E special talking about the case. The documentary claims that Casey's parents deny any involvement in the case. This ongoing family fracture underscores the dysfunctional dynamics that we just discussed, where shame, denial, and conflicting narratives continue to prevent healing. Casey attempted to start a private practice firm in 2020, but it stalled to her inability to obtain an investigator's license as a convicted felon, reflecting on ongoing legal and social barriers. So what does this all mean? Casey's reemergence invites us to revisit the motives we speculated about. Was her behavior driven by a desire for freedom? Was it a cover-up or an accident? Or a psychological break? Her current actions suggest someone grappling with stigmatized identity, possibly seeking redemption or control in a world that still sees her as a villain. The public's outrage reflects our collective struggle with ambiguity. As I noted earlier, it's a need to cast her as an antagonist in a story without a clear ending. We desire closure, and we don't have that here in this case. This case teaches us that mental health is not a footnote, but a central thread in understanding human behavior. Casey's story and Kaylee's loss remind us to advocate for early intervention, to listen to families in crisis, and to approach judgment with humility. I urge you to hold space for the complexity of this tragedy, to honor Kaylee's memory, and to continue asking questions, not just about what happened, but how we can prevent such a loss in the future. So that's the Casey Anthony's case. Do you think she's the worst mom ever? Do you think she had a psychological break? Do you think she covered it up? Do you think it was an accident and she didn't know what to do? I would love to know your thoughts. Have you done your own research on this case? So let's start this conversation. I love reading all the comments on my videos. And if you have a case that you want me to analyze, let me know. I would love to know your suggestions for future therapy crime scenes. And that's all for this therapy crime scenes video. Thank you so much for watching. My name is John Cordray. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I talk about true crime through the lens of mental health. Until next time, take care of yourself. Bye-bye.